It's very scary to think that people are going to get to that point again to where this list gets longer and longer and longer.
There is an article, and I think that what you all mentioned about the concerns about, the current environment that we're in and how it could exacerbate this problem and the issue of services. It's kind of like no one here would would argue that there are sufficient services. We know that there are not.
Mhm.
We know that families are begging, are staying on waiting lists for decades, and then people, adults, are then they transition to adulthood and they're still on the waiting list. And we know that people are not getting sufficient services. That's not an issue. But again,
I
the
will say,
yes,
I want to say along with that, and none of those people kill their children.
yes, thank you.
Right?
Welcome to Herding Cats and other stories from the genesis of the neurodiversity movement.
Let's herd some cats together with hosts Kassiane, Morenike, Renee, and Oswin.
Hello, everyone. This is Oswin Latimer. I am the president and founder of Foundations for Divergent Minds.
Hi, I am Kassiane Asasumas. I've been doing autistic things for a very long time. I am on the board of Foundations for Divergent Minds, and I have the dubious distinction, or not so dubious distinction, of having coined the word neurodivergent and spending the last nearly 30 years of my life arguing about it.
Hey y'all, this is Morenike Naiwu. I'm also on the board of Foundation for that's a bad way to say it. Foundations for Divergent Minds. Y'all excuse me, it's a kind of a very low spoons day. I am a scholar activist whose work, you know, is primarily centered around disability justice issues, racial equity, and so forth. And yeah, I'm not good at introductions, so hi.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Disability Day of Mourning and then wherever things go from there.
All right. So I'm about to be very upsetting, but this is also a thing that this is the rundown that I have given many, many people many, many times. So once upon a time, there were, well, there are many stories that start once upon a time. There was a parent who had a disabled child and decided they didn't want a disabled child anymore and killed them. This story played out enough times that reading all the names lasts over an hour. But in 2014, I believe it was, we're going to double check. No, 2012, this is. I pulled up a thing. A man named George Hodgins was murdered by his mother in Sunnydale, California. It was one of many murders that year of autistic and other disabled people by their parents and caregivers. Not a single article about the murder of George Hodgins mentioned his name. They were about the tragedy of Elizabeth, his mother. And that is when something snapped for everybody. And thus the Disability Day of Mourning was born. And now, every year, disabled people and people who actually care about disabled people get together and read the names of those of us who were killed by our caregivers. Because it happens a lot. And it's gotten a real sentence maybe twice. Katie McCarran's killer got a real sentence, and I think there was one other. And by real sentence, I mean it was treated as a murder instead of as, oh,
Quote unquote
you did a
mercy killing.
semi-bad thing, I guess, but it wasn't really that bad. They are consistently treated as mercy killings, or as, my least favorite is when it was listed in the, when you have the people in the paper saying, well, we all think about it. No, I'm pretty sure y'all don't. But the first Disability Day of Mourning was in 2012, and now it happens every year, and the list of names gets longer every year. It takes over an hour to read at this point. And people outside the disability community still don't know about it. And that's actually extremely messed up. that we have to get together to mourn our dead, and we still have to get together and say, actually killing us is not okay, and that's controversial. Which means, of course, that I'm going to say, no, you really can't kill us louder and harder because I'm obstinate, and this should not be controversial. The first one was in the middle of March because that's when it happened, but it's now the first weekend of March.
The reason it was in the middle of March back then was because we needed, or we didn't get the permits done, and trying to figure out when we could get permits for the area outside of ASN's original office. It was off of K Street, which I find to always be funny that we worked on K Street. If anybody remembers back in the Occupy Wall Street days, it was Main Street, not K Street. K Street is the lobbyist street, more or less. It's not the only one, but it's a big one. And so we took over Farragut Park in the middle or along K Street. So it wasn't that far off of the from the White House. And I really want to say it was a lot to do that the first time. I haven't ever gone back and done it since the first 2 years that I did it when I was with ASN, because it's just so hard. And like, I was one of the people that read the names, and the second year I just broke down in tears as I was reading them and just kept on going and kept on reading as my voice was breaking up. Because it was hard because there were so many kids, and so many of them were my kids' ages. Like at the time, my older two were like, let's see, how old were they? Goodness.
They were young.
They were young. So 8 and 7. And like all of these names had all these kids that were that age and younger, and obviously older as well, because George was very much an adult, wasn't, and like, but reading all of it, and like I was saying to y'all before we started recording, like, I don't remember if it was the first year or the second year, but this online dude that we all knew back then, should I say his name or should I not evoke his name? What do y'all think?
Not.
Okay, cool.
Not. Just call him Mr. the Worst.
Yes. That's funny.
Yes, anybody who knows who I'm referencing will get it, and anybody who doesn't, that's fine.
But like he was saying that he was gonna come down, and like he was threatening violence against the Disability Day of Mourning. This was an autistic man that very much hates.
He's not autistic.
Oh no, his son is autistic. Sorry.
His son is autistic, and he is a rabid anti-vaxxer. And
I forgot. I haven't thought of him in years, but it was the first thought I thought of with Disability Day of Mourning, because we had to call the police and we had to make sure there were patrols around, and we didn't know how credible it was because it was like maybe a 3-hour drive for him to get there.
So you didn't have to explain to the police that cars work? Like they understood that even though he was in another state, it was in fact a possibility?
Yes, they did take it seriously, incredibly, but it's also DC, so like they take those sorts of things a lot more credibly. But it was pretty intense to be there and have to think about all that. And I know that ASN eventually put out a filicide toolkit for media even, but I don't see a lot of people using it, and we still don't see a whole lot of centering the disabled person in their own death. And that is incredibly upsetting. because we've been doing this for over a decade now, and it's still not really changed all that much.
So I want to chime in because I'm not sure when this is going to air, but we're in 2025 now, and sadly, there are already 6 entries to the list. And for those who are interested, you can find the list at I believe it's disability memorial.org. And that's the running list of information is the official site for Disability Day of Mourning. And just out of respect, I just want to share briefly about our disabled siblings who we've lost already in 2025, which has just barely started. And the first person is Katarina Witten, who died at age 29. I'm sorry, was killed. Because none of these people died; they were murdered by their caregivers. Katarina lived in Arkansas, and Katarina had Fraser syndrome, was also blind and autistic. Katarina was adopted from Russia, along with a large sibling group. And all of the children were all abused, neglected. David Witten, who's Katarina's quote unquote father, was charged with negligent homicide and 6 counts of endangering the welfare of an incompetent person. Incompetent. Yes. Um, a few days later, we lost Jaden Dixon. And Jaden was 11 years old, was smothered in California. Jaden um, was an autistic preteen, lived in a trailer park, had a mother who had some substance abuse and alcohol issues, and um, murdered Jaden as well as their 3 dogs. Um, Shortly after that, a few days later, sorry, I'm just listening. The order is wrong, and I want to do this in the right order. Give me a second. Um, was the same day that Jaden died, Diane Glaske died. Diane was 72 and lived in Florida. Diane's husband, it is believed to have been a murder suicide. Um, they were, both, older, had various disabilities, and um, unfortunately, she didn't have much time to continue her life. Um, Next, we lost Anupriya Kumar, who was only 5 years old. He died also that same day in India. He was autistic. He was poisoned by, I'm sorry, she was poisoned along with her 2-year-old brother and her parents, who it was a murder suicide. The father had been having some trouble financially as a business. He lost his businesses and reportedly didn't cope well with having an autistic child, and as a result, murder. Um, about a week and a half later, on the 17th of January, Helen Witter was killed by gunshot, was murdered. Helen was 80 years old. Um, Her husband shot her because she had dementia, and he felt that she was irritable and no longer wanted to deal with her. Um, and so she had 4 children who loved her very much, 7 grandchildren and 8 great grandchildren. Her husband was charged with murder. A week after that, on the 23rd, 13-year-old Melanie Granados from Arizona. Melanie had intellectual disability as well as myoclonic epilepsy. And Melanie was 13 and was covered in bruises. Her grandmother told the police and the medics that Melanie fell down the stairs, but it was discovered later that she had been caged, that the family kept her caged and abused her, both her mother and her grandmother. And so they were both charged with felony child abuse, not with murder. And so, yeah, this is pretty sobering, but this is the reality. There are people on the list as young as newborns. There are senior citizens. There are people from, so many different countries of the world. There are virtual vigils that are held to mourn our dead. There are in-person ones. Last year they were held in Brazil, Canada, various parts of the United States. There's been one in Ghana in the past. It's very sobering. I attended one that one of our colleagues, Lee Brown, hosted in Georgia, I believe in 2016, I think it was, or 17, and I'm not sure. And it was sobering. I think it took over 2 hours to read the names and the causes of death, and it was just very, it was very sobering that this is the reality that the people that we love, be it our caregivers, spouses, siblings, parents, whomever, who should cherish us, are sometimes the ones who end our lives. And so this is, um, not a joyful part of our community's history, but it is a very real part.
It
It is such an important part. One of the things that always comes up when there's a murder, and there's so many, like, we're not even a full 60 days into the year, and that um is, well, services. And the thing is, it should never be about, it's not about services. It's not, let's see, Alex Fortalykas's parents, mother and grandmother, I believe it was, turned down services before murdering him. Katie McCarran, who I mentioned earlier, who whose killer actually got a real sentence, and a lot of that is honestly because her father and grandfather were relentless with, no, actually, we love this kid. Her mother should never have done that. Please stop talking about her this way, media. Thank you. Um, she had adequate services, and then she went home, and mom said, "I don't want this kid." Services are never the answer, and the time for that conversation exists. It is not in the wake of a murder, because that's holding our lives hostage. Okay, like, I know that a lot of our audience is very good at patterns and is going to see that. But if you say, "We kill you because we don't have services," that is a very clear hostage taking line, and it's not the time. And explaining that has been very exciting, by which I mean frustrating. And Disability Day of Mourning is basically our collective funeral for way too many people. Not the time to say, "Well, this is why you kind of had it coming," which is what the services conversation is. And that feels very important to say with my out loud words, because I do know there are some people who have not yet heard or made that connection. And yeah.
What
And
worries me about it right now is that a lot of the rhetoric we're going to start hearing now that we have RFK Jr. at the head of HHS is
Mhm.
that we're going to hear and see these things happen more. Like,
Mhm.
I'm really, really worried about that. And like, as you're listing, as Morenike was listing everything, I was like thinking about it, how much that rhetoric is going to be growing. And our lives matter. All of our lives matter. And I don't want people to believe that we don't. It's very scary to think that people are going to get to that point again, to where this list gets longer and longer and longer.
there is an article, and I think that what you all mentioned about the concerns about the current environment that we're in, and how it could exacerbate this problem, and the issue of services. It's kind of like, there no one no one here would would argue that there are sufficient services. We know that there are not. We know that
Hmm.
families are begging, are staying on waiting lists for decades, and then people, adults, are then they transition to adulthood and they're still on the waiting list. And we know that people are not getting sufficient services. That's not an issue. But again,
I will say,
yeah,
I want to say along with that, and none of those people kill their children.
yes, thank you,
Right?
thank you,
Like, none of those people kill their children. They're just waiting.
They're
exactly.
waiting.
Murder is never the answer. And so it's actually very dehumanizing and insulting of the not only of our lives as disabled people, but of our loved ones, that basically to insinuate that they'd be better off if we weren't here, if we were dead, that they should just give up on us in this way. It's, so the conversation about service is an important one, but it isn't one that should be held in conjunction with filicide. Those two things, no, they aren't related. They should never be related. And there's an article by a couple of scholars, Karen Williams and Duncan Murray, that came out late, I believe it was to the end of 2024. And it's an open access article, so anyone can review it. They don't have to pay, for access to it. And it was published in Neurodiversity Journal, which is an online journal, and it talks about cruel optimism. And so it's called Cruel Optimism and Ableist Assumptions, Ableist Discourse in, I believe, in Mothering. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It talks about the concept of the warrior mother, the good mother, and how it, you know, essentially this zero sum game of always, you know, doing whatever it takes at the expense of, sparing no expense financially or emotionally or what have you to chase, to unlock or, recover, or, obtain the perfect child, and how it is it essentially is harmful, and toxic and abusive, cruel optimism, not just for the child, but for the, subjectification of the mother as well, and how it, presents this autism-free child as the standard that's obtainable, and this intensive motherhood and your child that's constantly, this um this thing that you have to fix, how it impacts, negatively the relationship between parent and child, and ultimately just fosters, so much ableism and destruction.
That sounds kind of like that whole, I mean, the warrior mother thing, and I've said that
Yes.
before, but with it spelled as historically, that sounds like the refrigerator mother hypothesis with more steps.
Absolutely. And actually, they cite the Generation Rescue and Jenny McCarthy and some of those, that whole Kirby period. They kind of use that as a case study for the period, that, and how those kind of these thoughts were ushered into the public, view and, normalized.
And we're doing it again. We're repeating that again, like right now.
Yes.
It's happening already. And that's why
Hmm.
that's why I'm thinking about it in those terms, because they are also going to start stripping services away at the same time that they're building up this narrative that we aren't worthy of, like, life.
Hmm. Well, no, they want us to go work on their organic food work farms, you see.
Yeah.
There was a lot of sarcasm there. I know I have a very flat affect, so it can be hard to tell. That was in fact sarcasm.
Well, I
So,
think about the Department of Education, the memo were sent to, all 50 states, basically giving them 2 weeks to remove all, vestiges of quote unquote DEI, or they will lose all of their public funding. So we, again, we know DEI or DEIA, whoever one, is inclusive of disability, of race, of gender, and so forth. And so, essentially we already know that the funding for, that it is needed in our schools, which is what a lot of people from age 3 to 21 rely upon, for services, is already insufficient. And so now, this funding that has already been, um appropriated, is being held hostage because of this, you know, inaccurate, racist, and ableist interpretation of quote unquote discrimination. And so I just think of how frightening it is, and then there are 12 states that already passed laws to end DEI initiatives, and more are considering doing so. So I just think of how much loss, how much when, if you are already if we already have disparities in diagnostics and in accessing services and what have you, and then you're going to cut this, I just see history repeating itself, but it almost seems like it's regressing, beyond what we were accustomed to earlier in the movement.
Yeah.
Okay, so to be slightly off topic, I feel like if you're going to say you're against DEI, you have to say the whole thing. You're against diversity, equity, and inclusion. You don't get to
Mm-hmm.
use the initialism. You got to say the whole thing. You have to specify which part you're
Oh,
against. You have to wave your
yeah, but
flag
they
high.
won't do that because DEI is really just their way of saying those people, Black people or trans
Yep,
people or whatever people we don't like.
It's all the people.
Yeah.
But I don't think they
it's
realize
all the
all
people.
the people are a lot more than them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right?
like,
But
y'all
I
should
think a
have
lot
kept.
of the people also don't realize that they are part of, like, no, most of y'all are part of you people. I don't think you understand. Y'all white women are part of DEI.
Exactly, because of
Yeah.
gender discrimination, or people forget about rural areas,
Also, they were the people that benefited from DEI
the
initiatives the
most.
most.
Absolutely.
I know.
Veterans,
Yo.
people,
Mm-hmm.
a foster care alum, first generation college
Well, they're
students.
repeal it. Like, they're going after Section 504, and it's like, y'all, oh my God, you are going after veterans? I thought you supported our troops, because, like, that's where voc rehab comes from, dude.
Yay.
And
Yeah.
oh, so
I'm
Like, what is your
I'm
hi,
honestly
go.
I have to go ahead and make sure that people are aware that I am not okay with the fact that we are probably going to end up seeing a bunch of disability orgs do the same damn thing they did with the ADA um and put trans people under the bus on this.
Yeah, I'm not okay with that either. Like, to be very, very clear.
Like, I'm pretty sure that's what's gonna happen there. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be what happens.
Mhm.
Because, like, literally already did that with the ADA. Like, that was literally a part of the ADA, was to exclude trans people from it.
And sadly, you're starting to see some of that rhetoric. I know some people are already opposing it and emphasizing the importance of, again, cross movement solidarity. And as Audre Lorde said, you know what I mean. There's no such thing as single. We don't have a single issue movement. We don't live single issue lives.
Mhm.
But I think that people are becoming very. I don't know. I don't know what to think. And so it's like, it's interesting. Like, we're talking about history. It almost feels like it's weird because we're in 2025, and yet in some ways it feels, I would say it feels like 2015, except that I felt more hopeful then. Um,
It
Mhm.
feels like 2009 to me. It feels like 2009, where I did not have hope and where things were this bad at the national level. The national level was just smaller then for onto them. It's now just so big and it encompasses so much because people like us have been here all along, like the intersectionality that we do. And that may actually be a good pivot. Um,
Hello, Perkinji.
um, like, because it's so much bigger now, the impacts are bigger, and because we have been here all along and we naturally have to bring in the intersectionality of it as that is reality, um, that it puts us in a really, really tricky spot overall. But we also have all the knowledge of all the things that were back then because we were living it then. And I think that's probably why I feel such responsibility to talk about the things that were happening back then.
Mhm.
like even
frustrating because like we've been here before.
yes. Last time that we recorded, Morenike, you had asked if we had failed people, and I think that we can see now, no, we did not.
I don't know. One thing that I wonder is if we, so, so I thought about this, like, I think about like my own evolution and like, through the years and like that of the community. And I think about how like, um, and I think about the different tactics and, roles that people have and the work that they do. And as I see the lack of understanding and just general awareness overall, um, you know, beyond the community, just, in general, and how it impacts all of us, like, it makes me very worried about um like our messaging, like our or overall, like how are we do we have a small group of people who have very specialized knowledge, like is that better than or there's a large group of people who have very precursory knowledge, like a very kind of like surface level understanding of things, and it just feels like um this no one knows, neither approach is enough, works well enough for us to be able to combat what we're facing now. And then I think about like the whole, and I know we're talking about history, but it's like it's hard for me to, I guess when we think about historically, like kind of like the need for numbers, to strengthen numbers and the group, like again, like you talked about cross movement solidarity, but how frustrating that can be. Like I think about myself, like a lot of stuff on social media that's talking about the 92% group, of which I'm part of, that, didn't vote for this person, you know what I mean? And how we're tired and frustrated. We're tired of marching. We're tired of rallies. We're tired of die-ins and pray-ins, and we're tired of making signs, and we're tired, but it's like, because it feels like we're fighting alone. And I think that sometimes, beyond just, like certain, like racial groups, I think our community also feels like that a lot of the time too. And I guess I'm concerned about when will people understand that, regardless of our different, needs or issues, this is a shared, this is a shared problem, and we're never going to get anywhere without enough hands involved, without enough voices. And why does it have to be when it personally impacts someone that others want to to be involved? Like this is what we were screaming about 10 years ago and 15 years ago, and like we're still there. And why?
I mean, I have been dissecting this a lot over the past week and a half, I guess, because um, I was asked to sit on Neurodiversity Journal's editorial board, and I've accepted. And I was asked to speak at a philanthropy conference, and so I'm going to do that. And I can see that people are pulling me in right now, and I can understand that that is because I have been saying the same things for over a decade. And maybe it's just that it takes so much time and everyone burns out and nobody re-enters after recovering. I think the people not re-entering after they've recovered, makes sense from from a energy standpoint. I did it already. I left and I came back. And I made the choice to come back, but that choice was hard to come to. Um, because there is not enough support to go around. And you have to just keep on saying the things over and over and over and over and over again. And eventually, when things come to pass that you've been saying and you've been trying to correct for, people can see that you've been trying to do that work, and like it finally meets them where they need me and they need us. And I think I have to be okay with that.
See, I'm kind of cynical about this. Like, I don't know. I'm tired. And saying the same thing is exhausting. Saying the same thing and getting yelled at for saying the same thing is exhausting. Like,
Mm-hmm.
saying the same thing, and then it comes to pass, and everybody is shocked. Who yelled at you is shocked Pikachu. Is it's like, okay, my sibling in Stardust. I'm not saying I told you so, but you could say, "Oh, my bad," and maybe in the future not yell at me for noticing patterns because I've been here 20 years and you are 20 years old. Can
Right.
we learn from this experience? Can we learn from this experience instead of, being a ball of I know everything? Maybe.
Well,
And
everybody
the
wants
answer
to
is no, we
FAFO.
cannot.
They cannot. They want to do it
Yeah,
themselves.
that's the thing. Doing the same thing for not even the same results, except for, the getting yelled at for knowing history, and that's a personal attack, is, I don't get my dopamine that way.
Yeah. If I see, if I didn't have to worry about paying the bills and like having
Mm-hmm.
a roof over my head, I probably wouldn't be doing so much.
Mm-hmm.
I'd still be doing something. Like I would still be doing something because I like thinking about um our neurology. Our neurology is just so fascinating to me. Um and dissecting how it comes to be is so fascinating. So like I would still be doing that. It's the enjoyable parts. But the rest of it I probably wouldn't be. And it's not like I make enough for that to actually be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um like we know how much I am breaking myself apart doing this. But I also don't have any other option
Mm-hmm.
because I'm never gonna fit in a capitalist society. And I don't qualify for anything to help even minorly sustain me. And even when I do, I won't be able to afford a place for me and Olivia. Like I won't be able to do it. So I have to keep doing this. And so, but I've been, so I have that as the driver for me that a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
don't have to have. But I've also been consistent. And that is why people listen to me. And over time, more people listen to me because, oh, Oswin was right. And I just do my best to not be in places where I'll be yelled at anymore. It happens still, but I can't do that part anymore. I can't have people yelling at me.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much.
Thanks for listening to Herding Cats. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe. It really helps us grow our community with your help.